"I shot my wife." With that 911 call, actor Michael Jace, once known for playing a conflicted cop on The Shield, instantly shifted from Hollywood star to the center of a real-life tragedy. Michael Jace was born in 1962 in Paterson, New Jersey. He became well-known on television, especially for playing Officer Julian Lowe on the FX series The Shield. His role as a conflicted police officer gained him steady work and recognition in Hollywood, but his real life eventually turned in a direction that led him far away from the screen and into a courtroom. Michael was married to April Jace, a former track and field athlete. They had 3 children together, but their marriage was filled with struggles. April had talked about wanting a divorce, which created even more strain between them. There were also suspicions of her being unfaithful. Michael seemed convinced about this, although April denied it in text messages she sent him before the incident. On the evening of May 19, 2014, something devastating happened inside their home in the Hyde Park area of Los Angeles. Michael called 911 and told the dispatcher that he shot his wife. He stayed at the house until authorities arrived. When officers entered, they found April in the hallway with several gunshot injuries. She did not survive. In later interviews with investigators, Michael admitted to what happened. He said that at first he picked up the gun because he wanted to harm himself but could not go through with it. Instead, he pointed the weapon toward April. He explained that she moved toward him and he pushed her back, firing at her legs. He claimed his intention was to cause her pain, not to end her life. The case went to trial. Prosecutors said the act was planned in advance. They showed text messages between the couple as part of their evidence. The defense, however, argued that it was not premeditated, but rather something done in the heat of the moment. After less than 3 hours of discussion, the jury found Michael guilty of second-degree wrongdoing. Because he had personally fired the weapon, his sentence carried an additional 25 years. On June 10, 2016, the judge sentenced him to 40 years to life in prison. In court, Michael apologized. He said, "There is absolutely no justification for my actions on that night. I am profoundly sorry for the pain that I've caused everyone." His words showed regret, but for April's family and friends, the loss could never be undone. As of the latest information, Michael Jace is serving his time at Corcoran State Prison in California. Next, meet another actor whose plan for money led to 2 lives being cut short. Daniel Wozniak was born in 1984 in Long Beach, California. He grew up in a theater community where acting was a big part of his life. From a young age, he loved performing and quickly became known in local plays. On stage, he appeared confident and likable, but behind this image, he was hiding serious personal struggles that would later shock everyone around him. By May 2010, his situation began to spiral. He was facing financial trouble and was under pressure with his wedding coming up. Instead of finding a healthy way out, he created a plan to get money fast. His first target was Samuel "Sam" Hare, a 26-year-old Army veteran who had recently returned home from Afghanistan. Daniel asked Sam to help him move some items in the attic of a nearby theater. Once Sam was there, Daniel carried out his plan by ending Sam's life with a gunshot. Afterward, in an effort to cover his actions, he cut apart Sam's remains and left them in a local nature reserve. But the plan did not stop there. Daniel knew that Sam's disappearance alone would raise questions. He decided to create another scene that would shift suspicion away from himself. He reached out to jury Julie Kibwishi, who was a close friend of Sam's and a student at Orange Coast College. Daniel tricked her into going to Sam's apartment by sending her messages that made it seem like Sam needed help. When Julie arrived, Daniel ended her life as well. He then staged the apartment to make it appear as if Sam had been responsible for what happened to Julie before disappearing. The reason behind all of this was money. Daniel wanted access to Sam's savings, which totaled more than $60,000. His plan was to use the money to pay for his wedding and honeymoon. To get to the money, he convinced a teenager named Wesley Freilich to withdraw cash from Sam's account. Wesley did not know the full story of what Daniel had done, but when authorities questioned him, the pieces began to fall into place, and Daniel quickly became the main suspect. At first, Daniel denied everything. Investigators pressed him for hours, showing him more and more evidence. Eventually, he admitted to what he had done. In his own words, he told police, "I'm crazy and I did it. I ended Julie's life and I ended Sam's life." This confession sealed his fate. He was arrested and formally charged. The trial gained national attention. Many people followed every update closely. In September 2016, after years of legal proceedings, Daniel was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree ending of life. The jury recommended the maximum sentence. On September 23, 2016, Judge John Conley officially gave Daniel the penalty of life-ending punishment. The courtroom was filled with the families of both Sam and Julie. They shared their heartbreak and anger over what had happened. Daniel sat quietly, showing little reaction as the decision was read. After his sentencing, Daniel was sent to the California Medical Facility. His case became part of the larger debate in California about whether the state should continue with life-ending punishments. In March 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom declared a pause on all such cases. Because of that, Daniel remains in prison under the same sentence, but without a clear timeline for what will happen next. Today, Daniel Wozniak is 41 years old. He continues to serve his sentence in California. His case is still remembered as one of the most shocking in the state, both because of the people involved and the cold way the plan was carried out. The next individual was a rising Canadian actor, but instead of a red carpet, he faced a courtroom in one of the country's most disturbing cases. Ryan Grantham was a young Canadian actor whose life took a very troubling turn. He grew up in Squamish, British Columbia, and was the son of Barbara Waite. Many people knew him from his roles in movies and shows like Diary of a Wimpy Kid and Riverdale. On the surface, his career seemed promising, but behind the scenes, Ryan was struggling deeply with his mental health. On March 31, 2020, when he was 21 years old, Ryan carried out a shocking act inside his family home. While his 64-year-old mother, Barbara Waite, was playing the piano, he shot her from behind. This was not something he did on impulse. Ryan had carefully planned it ahead of time. He even recorded the entire process on video. The footage showed what he had done, including the aftermath, where his mother no longer showed signs of life. Later, this video was presented in court, showing just how deliberate his actions were. Why did Ryan do this? Psychiatric reports later explained that he was battling severe depression and dark thoughts. According to what was revealed during the trial, Ryan said he believed he was sparing his mother from seeing the harmful acts he wanted to commit later. The next day, Ryan prepared for something much bigger. He packed his car with 3 firearms, a large amount of ammunition, 12 homemade firebombs, camping gear, and a map leading to Rideau Cottage, the residence of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. His original plan was to target the Prime Minister, but Ryan never went through with it. Instead, he drove to Vancouver and turned himself in at a police station. When his case was brought before the British Columbia Supreme Court, Ryan admitted guilt to second-degree unlawful taking of life. During the hearings, his family shared their pain. His sister spoke about how deeply this had affected her and the rest of their loved ones. Justice Kathleen Kerr noted Ryan's mental health struggles. She also pointed out that Ryan's choice not to continue with a larger harmful plan was considered a factor in his favor. Even so, the seriousness of what he did to his mother could not be overlooked. The court gave him a life sentence. He was told he would only be able to apply for parole after 14 years. The next man was one of Mexico's most popular telenovela stars, until one road rage incident in Miami changed everything. Pablo Daniel Lyle Lopez was born in 1986 in Mazatlan, Sinaloa, Mexico. He first started his career as a model before moving into acting in 2005. He rose to fame through his work in popular telenovelas such as La Sombra del Pasado and Mi Adorable Maldición. He also appeared in the Netflix series Yankee. In 2015, People en Español named him one of the 50 most beautiful people. In 2014, Pablo married Ana Araujo. Together, they have a son named Mauro. Everything seemed to be going well in his career and personal life. But on March 31st, 2019, an incident in Miami, Florida, changed everything. Pablo was traveling with his family when they became involved in a heated situation on the road with a 63-year-old man named Juan Ricardo Hernandez. At a red light, Hernandez stepped out of his car and walked toward Pablo's vehicle, reportedly to confront him about driving. Pablo then got out of his own car and struck Hernandez in the face. Hernandez fell backward and hit his head on the pavement. He was rushed to the hospital. After several days, doctors confirmed that the head injury he suffered was severe, and he did not recover. At first, Pablo faced charges for physical aggression. After Hernandez's passing, the charges were raised to involuntary loss of life. During the trial, prosecutors used surveillance video and witness statements to show that Pablo's response was unnecessary. They also mentioned that Hernandez's last words were, "No, please don't hurt me," before he collapsed. Pablo's defense argued that he acted out of fear. They claimed he was protecting his family and thought Hernandez might have had a weapon. Pablo did not testify during the trial, as advised by his lawyers. In October 2022, after a week-long trial, a jury of 6 people found him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. A few months later, in February 2023, the judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison. He was also ordered to complete 8 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and take classes on conflict resolution. At his sentencing, Pablo expressed regret. He told Hernandez's family, "I am very sorry. I always pray for him and for you with all my heart." Today, Pablo is serving his sentence in Florida. His story is a reminder of how one moment of anger can create lifelong consequences, not just for the person involved, but also for their family and others around them. The next man made Britain smile once. Now his name is tied to tragedy. He was once a young boy with a bright future. Many people remembered him from a milk commercial that briefly made him famous. But over the years, his life went in a very different direction. He became involved in violence, addiction, and choices that eventually led to a lifelong prison sentence. Kevin Spaine's early life is not well documented. He grew up in or near Liverpool, England. As a child, he appeared in a Milk Marketing Board advertisement in 1989. He wore a Liverpool football kit and said the line, "Accrington Stanley? Who are they?" That simple line became well known in Britain and stayed in public memory for years. After that, his time in the spotlight ended. His life slowly became filled with trouble, poor decisions, and addiction. By the time he reached his mid-40s, Kevin had a long record with the police. Since 1999, he had faced charges for selling illegal substances, violent behavior, and attempted theft. He spent years caught between addiction and time behind bars. In court, his lawyer would later say that Kevin's life had been completely controlled by substance abuse. Then came the event that would change everything. On July 27, 2022, around 3 in the afternoon, an apartment on Belmont Drive in Anfield, Liverpool, became the scene of a violent confrontation. Inside that flat, Kevin repeatedly struck 53-year-old Leroy Venner. The court later heard that Leroy suffered serious head injuries. Emergency workers arrived quickly and took him to the hospital, but doctors were unable to save him. The reason behind Kevin's violent outburst was never fully clear. He admitted that he was responsible for Leroy's passing, but said he had not meant to cause it. During the trial, however, the evidence suggested that his actions were deliberate and forceful. Kevin denied intentional harm, but the jury did not accept his version of events. The trial took place at Liverpool Crown Court. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence, witness accounts, and details about Kevin's past violent behavior. After reviewing all the facts, the jury found him guilty. On February 22, 2023, the verdict was announced. The following day, the judge sentenced him to life in prison with a minimum of 18 years before he could apply for release. During sentencing, his defense lawyer asked the court to consider Kevin's past and his struggle with addiction. The lawyer reminded the court that Kevin had once been a talented young actor and athlete, but the judge said that none of those factors excused what he had done, especially considering the pain caused to Leroy's family. After the sentencing, Leroy Venner's family spoke to the press. They described him as a kind and gentle man with a warm heart. The judge also spoke about the seriousness of the act and the deep loss suffered by the family. Up next is a shocking case of fame, food, and fraud. James Timothy Norman was born in 1979 in St. Louis, Missouri. He was raised by his mother, Robbie Montgomery, who used to be a backup singer for Ike and Tina Turner. Norman grew up in a family connected to entertainment and restaurants. His mother later opened Sweetie Pie's, a soul food restaurant that became the focus of the reality TV show Welcome to Sweetie Pies. Even though the family had public success, Norman's early life had serious legal problems. In his late teens, he was convicted of armed theft and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After serving his time, he returned to St. Louis. He started working at his mother's restaurant, trying to rebuild his life and reputation. However, behind the scenes, Norman had darker plans. In 2014, he took out a life insurance policy worth $450,000 on his nephew, Andre Montgomery Jr., without telling him. Norman made himself the only person who would benefit from the policy. At that time, Montgomery was 18 and living with his grandmother, Robbie Montgomery, in St. Louis. The public saw Norman and Montgomery as close and supportive, but privately, Norman was planning a serious crime. On March 14, 2016, Andre Montgomery Jr. was shot in St. Louis. Later, investigators used surveillance footage and phone records to piece together what happened. Terrika Ellis, a dancer from Memphis, Tennessee, had been in touch with Norman in the days before the incident. On the day Montgomery was shot, Ellis used a temporary phone to track him and then contacted Norman. Soon after, Ellis returned to Memphis. Norman tried to collect the life insurance money. Investigators also found that Ellis had deposited over $9,000 in cash into several bank accounts shortly after the event, showing a financial connection to the plan. The investigation revealed that Norman had planned the whole scheme. He had worked with Ellis to lure his nephew to a place where harm would come to him, ensuring he would receive the insurance money. A third person was reportedly hired to carry out the act, but details about this person remain unclear. This person was never publicly identified or charged. Norman's trial started in 2022. The prosecution presented strong evidence. They showed the plan to hire someone, the secret insurance policy, and the financial transactions after Montgomery's death. The defense argued that Norman was being unfairly targeted and that the evidence was not enough to convict him. Despite this, the jury spent over 17 hours discussing the case. They found Norman guilty on all charges, including conspiracy to hire someone to commit the act resulting in death, and conspiracy to commit wire and mail fraud. In March 2023, Norman was sentenced to life in federal prison without the chance for release. The judge described the crime as cold-blooded, incredibly premeditated, planned. Norman did not speak during the sentencing, and his family or lawyers made no statements. His lack of explanation or remorse added to the seriousness of the case. As of 2025, James Timothy Norman remains in prison, serving his life sentence. The next man was a familiar face on TV dramas, but in real life, Isaiah Stokes was plotting a fatal act. Isaiah Stokes was once a familiar face on television. He appeared in shows like Law & Order, SVU, Boardwalk Empire, and Blue Bloods. But in March of 2025, his life took a very different turn. This event happened on February 7th, 2021. It was not random. It grew out of a long personal conflict between the two men that started at a birthday party. Back in October of 2020, Stokes was asked to leave Jones's birthday celebration. Witnesses said it was because of his inappropriate behavior. That moment sparked a deep resentment in Stokes. Prosecutors explained that he held on to that anger for months. During this time, Stokes decided to keep track of Jones. He placed a GPS tracker on Jones's car so he could monitor his movements. On the afternoon of February 7th, 2021, Jones was sitting in his Jeep Cherokee. He was waiting for a friend. Stokes approached him. Surveillance footage showed Stokes walking up to the car and opening fire. He released 11 rounds into the vehicle. Jones did not survive. Afterward, Stokes returned the rental car he had used that day. He also got rid of the weapon. The prosecution described the act as carefully planned. They stressed that Stokes had been upset about the birthday party incident for months. His resentment only grew stronger until it led to this aggressive outcome. In March of 2025, after a trial that lasted 2 weeks, the jury found Stokes guilty. The charges included second-degree unlawful taking of a life and 2 counts of unlawful possession of a firearm. On March 21, 2025, Stokes was sentenced. The judge ordered 25 years to life in prison. The courtroom heard once again about how the plan was carried out with clear intent. The sentence reflected the seriousness of what had happened and the deliberate way it was carried out. The next individual played a comic villain in Austin Powers, but his real-life crimes were far darker than anything in the movies. He was born in Gwangju, South Korea, in 1970. Later, he moved to the United States. He eventually became a minor actor and martial artist. In movies, he had small roles. He is most known for playing Random Task in Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, a parody of the Bond villain Odd Job. But behind this Hollywood footnote, his life took a much darker turn. His history of serious offenses stretches back decades. It includes one of the most shocking acts of cruelty in California. Later, while in prison, he was also involved in taking the life of a cellmate. His most well-known offense happened on Christmas Eve, December 24, 1990, in Orange County, California. A young woman was walking home with her dog after seeing Christmas lights. She was ambushed. According to prosecutors, he and an accomplice, Santiago Gaitan, tricked her by pretending to need directions. They forced her into their car while showing a gun. They threatened her and subjected her to unwanted acts. They hit her with the gun, forced unwanted activity, and humiliated her. The woman was frightened and extremely suffered during this time. Afterwards, they released her naked, with her pants tied around her eyes, saying, "Merry Christmas," or something similar. Why did this happen? The motives included cruelty, power, and instilling fear. He counted bullets, threatened her life, and used intimidation as part of the ordeal. Many early charges, such as abduction and inappropriate harm, were later dropped because the statute of limitations had expired. However, prosecutors could pursue the charge of extreme suffering, which has no time limit. In August 2011, a jury found him guilty of 1 count of extreme suffering related to the 1990 case. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole, which means he would never be free again. During the sentencing, the victim spoke in court. She said the act destroyed her life. She explained she lost much of her 20s, struggled to regain basic stability, lost her job and education, and could not celebrate holidays in peace for years. He began serving this life sentence. While in Wasco State Prison, he became involved in taking the life of his cellmate, Michael Graham. On October 10, 2011, he was sharing a cell with Graham, who was about 5'9" and weighed around 161 pounds. He was much smaller than Sun, who was stocky and heavy. Earlier that day, Sun asked a prison officer to move him to a different cell for convenience. The officer said non-emergency moves would happen later. Sun insisted several times. That evening, the officer returned to cell 228. Sun was washing his hands. Graham was lying on the bunk and appeared unresponsive. Sun called out, "Man down!" When officers opened the cell, Graham was found lifeless. He had bruises all over his upper body, a collapsed chest, fractured ribs, internal injuries, lung damage, neck injuries, a torn spleen, and contusions in his intestines. His sternum was broken twice, and the chest felt soft to touch. A pathologist said the injuries required extreme pressure, not something like CPR. The cell showed no signs of struggle. There were no weapons and nothing disturbed. Sun remained calm. He said, "Is he gone?" He fell down twice, and I helped him up. Medical staff confirmed Graham was unresponsive about 25 minutes later. The autopsy showed the cause was from multiple blunt force injuries. Why did it happen? Was it planned or a sudden outburst? Sun claimed he had been targeted many times in prison. He said he had been confronted aggressively 9 times before. As an Asian inmate, he said he needed to avoid trouble. He testified that Graham had verbally harassed him, used racial slurs, and provoked him. Sun claimed he acted in imperfect self-defense. Prosecutors argued the force used was far beyond any reasonable defense. The injuries were extreme. His trial started on July 10, 2017. The jury did not find full intentional harm, but convicted him of voluntary manslaughter, which considers a heated or partially justified state without full intent. At sentencing, the court added consecutive enhancements due to his previous convictions, including the torture case. He received 22 years for the manslaughter and 5 years for a serious felony enhancement. This totaled 27 years to be added on top of the life sentence he was already serving. He appealed parts of the sentence, including questions about court fees, but the conviction and punishment were mostly upheld, with some aspects sent back for review. The next man built his career on fame and loyalty, then was accused of ending a fan's life. Corey Miller was born in New Orleans in 1971. He grew up as the youngest in a family that would later be well known in the hip-hop world. By the late 1990s, Corey had built his own name as a rapper. He performed under the stage name C Murder and was signed to No Limit Records, the label his brother Master P had created. He was not only a rapper, but also appeared in several small film and television roles connected to No Limit's projects. His public life before the case was full of music, tours, and a reputation tied to street life. That reputation often brought him into late-night venues where crowds could sometimes get heated. Everything changed on January 18, 2002. That night, Corey was at the Platinum Club in Harvey, Louisiana. A fight broke out, and in the middle of the chaos, a 16-year-old boy named Steve Thomas lost his life. Miller was quickly taken into custody and accused of being the one responsible. Steve Thomas had entered the club with a borrowed ID. He was described as a fan of Corey's music and had gone there just to see him perform. Witnesses said words were exchanged, then pushing and shoving turned into a fight. In that confusion, Steve was struck and then shot in the chest. He passed away later at a hospital. Corey was arrested within a day. From that point forward, his life became a long legal battle. Witness statements were messy and inconsistent. Some people pointed to Miller, while others were unsure. At least one person said they had been pressured to name him, and later admitted that their statement wasn't entirely true. These contradictions later became key to Miller's defense. Prosecutors described the night in simple terms. They said a famous rapper got into a confrontation and shot a fan in the middle of a brawl. The defense, however, painted a very different picture. They argued that the crowd was chaotic, the evidence was weak, and that police had leaned on witnesses to get statements that weren't reliable. The case dragged on for years, partly because of legal technicalities. In 2003, Corey was convicted, but that ruling was later thrown out because prosecutors had failed to share important information about witnesses with the defense. Some of those witnesses had histories that could have damaged their credibility. Because that information was not shared, the verdict was set aside. This forced a retrial years later. By then, memories had faded, relationships had changed, and some witnesses even recanted their earlier claims. The retrial finally took place in 2009. That jury again found Miller guilty of second-degree charges, but the decision was not unanimous. At the time, Louisiana law allowed a conviction with a 10-2 jury vote. The judge then sentenced Miller to life in prison with no chance of parole. For Steve Thomas's family, the sentence brought a sense of justice for the loss of their son. For Corey and his supporters, it was unfair. The defense kept fighting, pointing out that some witnesses had taken back their earlier statements. At least one man said he had been pressured by police to identify Miller as the shooter. But courts treated those recantations with caution. Judges said the timing and credibility of those new statements were not strong enough to overturn the jury's decision. Appeals and requests for new trials were repeatedly denied. Meanwhile, in a separate civil case, a jury ruled against Miller. They found him responsible for wrongfully taking a life and ordered him to pay damages to Steve's family. Civil trials require a lower standard of proof than criminal trials. For the Thomas family, the civil verdict gave another layer of recognition to their loss. For Miller's team, it was another example of a flawed process built on weak evidence. Over the years, Corey Miller has continued to speak out. From prison, he has released music and publicly insisted on his innocence. Celebrities and legal advocates who focus on reform have supported him. They have pointed to the fact that his conviction came from a non-unanimous jury, something the Supreme Court later ruled unconstitutional for new cases. But that ruling was not applied retroactively, so it did not change Miller's sentence. His attorneys have kept filing appeals, raising claims about coerced statements and withheld evidence, but courts have stood by the original verdict. At his sentencing, Steve Thomas's family shared their pain in emotional words. His mother said, "We still cry every day for our baby."